Some films don't fade. They simply wait. Beneath the dust of decades lie stories once applauded, now abandoned. But what if the greatest movies of the 1960s aren't the ones we remember, but the ones we forgot? These are the hidden treasures, the masterpieces that slipped between cracks. Are you ready to rediscover the films that time tried to bury, but that brilliance refuses to let go? 1. Point Blank, 1967. Lee Marvin walks through shadows, silent, stoic, cold as chrome. In Point Blank, he isn't just a man wronged. He's a ghost of vengeance, drifting through a city that no longer feels real. At first glance, it's a revenge thriller. But beneath its hard-boiled exterior lies something hypnotic, something disorienting, something unforgettable. Marvin plays Walker, a man betrayed and left for dead after a heist gone wrong. But he doesn't want justice. He doesn't want closure. He wants his money. That's it. Or so it seems. John Boorman directs with icy precision, draping the film in sleek glass, sterile corridors, and surreal transitions that blur dream and reality. Is Walker alive? Or already gone? Adapted from Donald E. Westlake's novel The Hunter, the movie plays like a fever dream in slow motion. Biographer Dwayne Epstein noted that Marvin, fresh from personal grief, poured his own haunted silence into the role. He barely speaks, but every footstep sounds like doom. Ignored upon release, Point Blank was too stylish, too strange, too existential for its time. Yet decades later, its fingerprints are all over modern cinema. Drive, John Wick, The Limey, they all owe a debt to Boorman's icy palette and Marvin's quiet fury. This isn't just pulp fiction. It's a meditation on betrayal and identity, and it's still pulsing with raw menace. Second Fails Safe, 1964. No score, no escape. Just ticking clocks and unbearable silence. Fail Safe doesn't ask for your attention. It grips your throat and never lets go. In an era when Dr. Strangelove found nuclear comedy, Fail Safe found only dread. Henry Fonda plays the U.S. president facing the unthinkable. A glitch in the military system sends bombers to Moscow. No recall is possible. No bluff is convincing. With every minute, annihilation grows closer. Directed by Sidney Lumet and adapted from Eugene Burdick and Harvey Wheeler's novel, the film dives into bureaucracy, communication breakdown, and the fragility of peace. The black and white cinematography isn't nostalgic. It's claustrophobic. And the close-ups? Terrifying. Historian Peter Biskind called it a political pressure cooker. Lumet, in his memoir Making Movies, said they intentionally drained the film of music and humor to let dread speak louder. It worked. The film feels like a funeral march for civilization. Fail Safe was overshadowed by Kubrick's satire, but it plays truer now than ever. In an age of drones and digital errors, the horror of one tiny misfire hasn't aged. It's only grown more plausible. The world may forget Fail Safe, but its warning still echoes in every silent war room. 3. The Swimmer, 1968. A sunny day. A backyard pool. A charming man in swim trunks. But nothing in The Swimmer is what it seems. Burt Lancaster plays Ned Merrill, the golden boy of suburbia who decides, on a whim, to swim home through his neighbor's pools. What starts playful quickly curdles into nightmare. Adapted from John Cheever's surreal short story, the film becomes a haunting allegory of denial, loss, and aging. Each pool he visits exposes another layer of Ned's crumbling identity. The smiles fade. The welcome wears thin. Is he a beloved neighbor or a forgotten relic? Director Frank Perry, with uncredited help from Sidney Pollack, crafts a world that looks picture-perfect but feels cracked beneath the surface. Lancaster, always larger than life, gives perhaps his most fragile performance. Biographer Kate Buford wrote that he saw the role as a reckoning, not with death, but with irrelevance. At its core, The Swimmer isn't about swimming at all. It's about what we refuse to see, about the illusions we build to keep despair at bay. With its disjointed timeline and fading grandeur, the film echoes the American dream, unraveling. Few films dare to show a man drowning in his own past. The Swimmer does, and it never lets you come up for air. 4. Blow Up, 1966. He zooms in, then again, then again. A photograph that seemed ordinary begins to whisper, then scream. Blow Up isn't a thriller in the traditional sense. It's a spiral into uncertainty, into obsession, into the question, what is truth when all you have are images? Michelangelo Antonioni's first English-language film follows a fashion photographer in swinging London who thinks he may have accidentally captured a murder. But did he? Or is it all in his mind? Based loosely on a story by Julio Cortázar, Blow Up dissects modern alienation. The colors are vibrant, the models are gorgeous, the lifestyle intoxicating. But underneath, everything feels hollow. Every zoom deeper into. The photograph brings more questions, not answers. And when the body disappears, so does reality. Antonioni grew up under Mussolini and knew the price of false narratives. That fear bleeds into every frame. Filmmakers like Brian De Palma and Christopher Nolan cite Blow Up as essential. Its ambiguity birthed a new kind of storytelling, one that didn't resolve, but revealed. In the end, the protagonist watches an invisible tennis match, pretending along with the crowd. The ball isn't real, but the unease is. Blow Up reminds us that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones we can't prove ever existed. 5. Playtime, 1967. Imagine a Paris made of glass and chrome, a future where technology controls everything, and no one seems to notice. In Playtime, Jacques Tati doesn't shout, he whispers, and in the silence, we laugh. Tati's Monsieur Hulot wanders through a city that's forgotten how to feel. Massive modernist buildings, identical office cubicles, automatic doors that open and close with no soul. It's not dystopian, it's absurd, but beautiful. Tati spent his life savings constructing Tativille, an enormous futuristic set built from scratch. It bankrupted him, but it gave him total control over every light, every reflection, every perfectly timed visual gag. There's barely any dialogue, but the comedy? It's in the background. A man stuck in a revolving door. A waiter losing control of a high-end restaurant. Life breaking through the machinery. Critics like Jonathan Rosenbaum called Playtime one of the greatest films ever made about city life. But audiences didn't know what to make of it. It disappeared, forgotten, until cinephiles resurrected it. Tati didn't condemn technology. He celebrated humanity's resilience within it. In every lost glance and awkward smile, he captured what it means to be human in a mechanized world. Playtime doesn't demand laughter. It invites it, quietly, elegantly, and it still sparkles today. 6th Persona, 1966. A woman refuses to speak. Another can't stop talking. And as the silence deepens, identities begin to blur. Persona is not just a film. It's a fevered poem, carved in celluloid, whispered into the subconscious. Ingmar Bergman created Persona during a personal breakdown, hospitalized and unsure if he could ever direct again. He channeled that crisis into something raw and unnerving. Liv Ullmann plays an actress who inexplicably stops speaking. Bibi Andersson is the nurse assigned to care for her. But as they isolate together in a cottage by the sea, their personalities melt, mirror, and fracture. The opening reels flicker with disjointed images, film projectors, a crucifix, a sheep's eye. Bergman reminds us we're watching a constructed reality, and then dares us to believe it. According to Ullman's autobiography, Bergman wrote the script in just 2 weeks, calling it a creation that simply arrived. Shot by Sven Nykvist in stark black and white, every close-up becomes a confession. There are moments where the actresses' faces literally blend together. One frame, two souls. Critics didn't always agree on what it meant. Feminist texts, psychoanalytic studies, even theology. Persona invites interpretation, not clarity. It influenced generations. David Lynch cited it when crafting Mulholland Drive. Charlie Kaufman borrowed its duality in Synecdoche, New York. Yet nothing rivals the original's power. Persona is not meant to be understood. It's meant to be felt. A mirror that shows not your reflection, but your unraveling. 7. The Servant, 1963. He pours the tea. He fluffs the pillows. He waits. But in The Servant, the man in uniform doesn't serve. He conquers. What begins as a tale of domestic convenience twists into a disturbing power struggle that redefined British cinema. James Fox plays Tony, a wealthy but aimless aristocrat. Dirk Bogarde is Barrett, the butler hired to maintain his London townhouse. But Barrett has other plans. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he unravels his employer's will, turning master into puppet. Directed by Joseph Losey and written by Harold Pinter, the film brims with silence, shadows, and suggestion. It was scandalous for its time, subtext dripping with class warfare, homoerotic tension, and psychological manipulation. Losey, blacklisted from Hollywood, brought an outsider's edge to British filmmaking. Pinter's script, filled with pauses and pointed glances, added menace without a single raised voice. When Barrett introduces his sister, played by Sarah Miles, things grow stranger. She seduces Tony, but nothing is as it seems. The household becomes a battlefield where dominance shifts with every whispered word. Film historian David Thompson called it a brutal parable of England's decay. But it's also timeless, a study of dependency, control, and the masks we wear. By the end, the roles have fully reversed. The butler stands tall. The master begs for order. And the viewer is left to wonder, was this always the plan? 8 seconds, 1966. You get a second chance. A new face. A new name. A new life. But Seconds asks, what if your second life is even emptier than the first? Directed by John Frankenheimer, Seconds is a paranoid masterpiece that blends sci-fi with existential dread. A disillusioned middle-aged banker, played first by John Randolph, pays a shadowy organization to fake his death. He awakens reborn as Rock Hudson, handsome and vibrant. But what follows isn't freedom, it's collapse. Frankenheimer, fresh off The Manchurian Candidate, dives headlong into psychological horror. Cinematographer James Wong Howe's camera twists reality, shooting with fisheye lenses, tilting angles, and disorienting movement. Every frame feels like a nightmare you can't wake from. Hudson's performance is revelatory. Known for romantic comedies and leading man glamour, he shatters that image here. Biographer Sarah Davidson later wrote that this was the role where Hudson most directly confronted his own identity and repression. The film flopped. Audiences didn't understand it. But over time, it gained cult reverence. Martin Scorsese called it one of the scariest films ever made. Because it speaks to a terror deeper than monsters or murder. The terror of not knowing who you really are. Seconds is a film about masks, about the promises of reinvention, and the truth that you can run from your life but not from yourself. 9 Targets, 1968. 2 horrors. 1 fictional, 1 frighteningly real. Targets collides old-school monster movies with contemporary violence, and the result is chilling. Boris Karloff plays Byron Orlok, an aging horror star who feels obsolete in a world where real terror dominates the news. Across town, a clean-cut young man loads his trunk with rifles and calmly begins a killing spree. As their stories converge, the line between cinema and reality vanishes. Peter Bogdanovich's directorial debut, Targets, was inspired by the real-life 1966 University of Texas Tower shooting. He was given limited funds and leftover Karloff days on contract. What he created was a bold, unflinching reflection on violence in America. Karloff, frail and pained from decades in costume-heavy roles, delivers a performance steeped in melancholy. This was his swan song, one where the actor who once terrified audiences confronts the idea that horror has moved off-screen. Film critic Roger Ebert hailed Targets as a remarkable debut that said something terrifying about America. Its documentary-style realism, especially in the sniper sequences, still unnerves. In the final scene, Orlok confronts the gunman, not with force, but with presence. It's as if cinema itself is asking, do we still matter? Targets isn't just a film, it's a reckoning, and its questions remain terrifyingly relevant. 10th, A Child is Waiting, 1963. In a world that turns away from difference, one film looked directly into its eyes. A Child is Waiting isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet, compassionate, and decades ahead of its time. Directed by John Cassavetes, though heavily edited by producer Stanley Kramer, the film stars Judy Garland as a music teacher at a state institution for children with developmental disabilities. Burt Lancaster plays the authoritarian head of the school, struggling between discipline and empathy. What sets A Child is Waiting apart is its realism. Cassavetes insisted on casting real children rather than actors. He used long takes and documentary-style cinematography to preserve their dignity and truth. According to biographer Ray Carney, Garland wept between takes. She connected deeply with the children, perhaps recognizing echoes of her own emotional battles. The film explores the tension between institutional care and emotional connection, between treating the children as patients or people. It asks uncomfortable questions. What does it mean to help? Who defines normal? And what happens when compassion contradicts protocol? Garland is luminous, subdued, aching, and utterly human. Lancaster, often stoic, gives one of his most layered performances. Their clashes are not melodrama. They are moral battles with no easy answers. The New York Times called it too raw. But today, its honesty feels like grace. This isn't just a film about children. It's about seeing, and the power of being seen. 11. Latru, 1960. No explosions, no car chases, just silence, steel, and the sound of a spoon scraping concrete. Latru, French for the hole, is not just a prison break film. It's a masterclass in tension, dignity, and detail. Directed by Jacques Becker, this final work was released just days before his death, and fittingly, it deals with time, mortality, and human limits. The story: 5 prisoners plot a daring escape from Paris's La Santé prison. But here's the twist. One of them is based on a real inmate, Jean Carodi, who plays himself. Becker, obsessed with authenticity, avoided music and theatrics. He filmed in long takes, often with a stationary camera, letting real-time labor unfold. Sawing through bars, tapping walls, drilling a hole in the floor with handmade tools. Each movement is deliberate. Each breath counts. Critic Pauline Kael called it the purest, most stripped-down thriller ever made. Yet it's not just suspense, it's character. These men aren't thugs or clichés. They are quiet, thoughtful, honorable even in confinement. The film treats them with respect, revealing the human cost of captivity. And when betrayal comes, and it does, it's not just heartbreaking, it's devastating. Because by then, we're inside the cell too. Latru doesn't cheer its escapees, it mourns them. Because the greatest prison may not be made of stone, but trust. 12. The Bedford Incident, 1965. The sea is still, the radar hums, and below, a Soviet sub waits like a coiled serpent. In the Bedford Incident, Cold War anxiety simmers until it detonates. This isn't a film about what might happen. It's about what will, if fear becomes command. Richard Widmark plays Captain Finlander, a hawkish U.S. Navy officer aboard the destroyer USS Bedford. His obsession with tracking an enemy submarine blurs vigilance into provocation. Sidney Poitier, in a rare supporting role, is a journalist witnessing the slow unspooling of madness at sea. Based on Mark Raskovich's novel, the film is stark, confined, and relentless. Director James B. Harris, best known as Stanley Kubrick's producer, frames every shot like a trap. The interiors are tight, the atmosphere suffocating. There is no music, just the ping of sonar and the creak of strained nerves. Military consultant William Lederer confirmed that much of the dialogue mirrored real naval policy at the time. And that's what makes it terrifying. One wrong move, one misunderstood order, and the ocean becomes a graveyard. When the unthinkable finally occurs, it does so with brutal quiet. No heroics, just a blinding flash and silence. The Bedford Incident is a warning in disguise, a fable without forgiveness. And its message is as urgent now as it was then. The real enemy is not out there. It's our own unchecked fear. 13th Blast of Silence, 1961. Snow falls on New York like ash. A man walks the streets, not as a ghost, but as a weapon. Blast of Silence pulls you not into a story, but into a mind. And once you're inside, there's no way out. Frankie Bono is a hitman, alone in the city for one job over Christmas. But this isn't a tale of mob glamour or stylized violence. It's a bleak, internalized monologue of a man hollowed out by his own survival. What makes the film unique is its voiceover, spoken in second person. You were born in pain, it begins. And suddenly, you're no longer watching Frankie. You are Frankie. Every step, every stare, every regret becomes your own. Writer-director Alan Barron delivers this noir nightmare with raw, guerrilla-style energy, filming in actual Manhattan locations without permits. Barron, who also stars as Frankie, was unknown. The voiceover was recorded by Lionel Stander, blacklisted at the time, adding yet another layer of subtext. The budget was low. The cinematography by Merrill Brody was grainy and harsh. But the result? Utterly immersive. Frankie's story isn't one of redemption. It's one of erosion. As the job spirals, so does his sense of self. Old acquaintances re-emerge. Doubt creeps in. And when the bullet finally flies, it's not release. It's inevitable. Blast of Silence is less a movie than a confession. One that implicates the viewer. One that leaves you wondering if silence was ever a choice, or just the only sound you had left. 14. The Face of Another, 1966. What if you wore a new face? Would you become someone else? Or lose who you were? The Face of Another is a psychological labyrinth dressed as a science fiction drama. And at its heart lies a terrifying question. Are we only as real as the skin we wear? Directed by Hiroshi Teshigahara and based on the novel by Kobo Abe, the film follows a businessman who suffers facial disfigurement from an industrial accident. Offered a lifelike mask to cover his scars, he agrees. But with the new face comes a new identity, and the unraveling begins. Tatsuya Nakadai delivers a mesmerizing performance, alternating between vulnerability and menace. As the mask fuses to his psyche, so too does his conscience begin to slip. The sterile clinical setting, the use of mirrors and glass, the chilling ambient soundtrack, all build a sense of isolation that borders on horror. Critic Donald Ritchie wrote that the film dismantles identity piece by piece. Indeed, it plays like a slow psychological spiral. The deeper he descends into his new persona, the further we drift from reality. It's a meditation on appearance, alienation, and how society reacts to the unfamiliar. But more disturbingly, it suggests that even with a perfect face, we might still remain strangers to ourselves. The face of another doesn't answer its central question. It merely reflects it, through a mask we all might wear. 15. Petulia, 1968. She laughs like freedom, but behind those eyes, a storm. Petulia opens like a romantic comedy and ends like a cry for help, echoing across the counterculture revolution. Richard Lester, known for A Hard Day's Night, directed this kaleidoscopic tale of a San Francisco socialite, Julie Christie, and a recently divorced doctor, George C. Scott. What begins as flirtation unravels into a fractured portrait of emotional chaos. Set against the summer of love, Petulia contrasts psychedelic optimism with personal despair. Lester weaves non-linear storytelling, flashbacks, and future glimpses, mimicking memory's disjointed nature. Cinematographer Nicholas Roeg drenches the film in saturated color, light flares, and mirrors, every frame reflecting something broken. Julie Christie is radiant yet wounded. Petulia is no ditzy dream girl. She's a woman trapped in an abusive marriage, desperate for escape but unsure how to ask. George C. Scott, rigid and rational, cannot save her because he doesn't understand what's broken. Critic Pauline Kael called it the first 60s film to look like the 70s. And she was right. Petulia foresaw the disillusionment to come. The end of the love-in, the price of freedom. This isn't just a love story. It's a scream wrapped in sunshine. And it still echoes. These 15 forgotten films weren't lost. They were waiting. Waiting for someone to see their light again. They dared to challenge, disturb, and redefine what cinema could be. Which one will you watch first? Let us know in the comments. And get ready. Next up, the plastic surgery secrets before filters existed. You won't believe who went under the knife.